Welcome to 2021 and welcome to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. Today's edition of the show is a very special edition of the show. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist, and it is my pleasure, nay, it is my honor to welcome you to the Federalist Awards ceremony for the worst media performances of 2020. Now, that's a tall order. 2020, as most of you know, was an atrocious year for the American news media. And some of these performances are probably still fresh on your mind. Others you may have forgotten because it was an incredibly long year. We wanted Meryl Streep to be here to present the awards. Unfortunately, she did have a conflict, so you have me. I wanted to wear a gown, but I also had a conflict, and the conflict is that I have nowhere to be now or ever, it seems like. Now, you're going to hear from most of our staff here at the Federalist over the course of this ceremony, and so it was a collaborative effort. We do this not with the hope or with the expectation that the corporate press will improve in 2021. We are under no illusions that that will be the case. It will not. But we do it with the hope that an increasing number of people recognize and understand the extent and level and size and scope of corruption that consumes the corporate press. So without further ado, it is again my honor to introduce the first of many awards for the worst media performances of 2020.
Oh, hello. Martin must have let you in. Have a seat. You'll have to excuse my appearance. I've got the COVID. Can I offer you a drink? These get me through. I'd offer you a mask, but they don't help, do they? An award show, you say? For my friends in the press. How delightful. Cheers. What is it to be? Which one of their stupid little conspiracy theories will we touch on today? Oh, the post office. That one was special. You do remember the post office. Back before Russia was a baddie, the post office was a glorious empire. It worked to your benefit at all times. The lines were quick. Everything moved perfectly. And then Donald Trump came along and tried to destroy it so that he could steal the election. Dear colleague, on returning to save the postal office, read Nancy Pelosi's urgent letter calling a Zoom call of her nation of heroes. Trump, clearly I'm screwing with the post office to sabotage the election, our fearless, oh-so-brave friends at Vanity Fair wrote. They even summoned President Barack Obama down from the mountain to decry Donald Trump's crime, the post office. How dare he? Well, of course, none of this was true. The post office was working. Their money contract negotiations weren't working out in their favor, so they called foul. But hey, water under the bridge. Who is around to remember these foolish little stories we had the former president of the United States chasing? Well, who except for us? So cheers to 2021, another year of completely stories.
Back in June, the New York Times reported that Russians had offered the Taliban bounties to kill American soldiers, that Donald Trump had been briefed on this, and that while officials had drawn up plans for how to respond, no response had been authorized. The story was explosive, and people were outraged. It turned out over the course of the next few days that much of what had been reported was not true, or that it lacked completely the appropriate context. It was true that there had been intelligence suggesting that some individuals linked to Russia had offered bounties. It was not sure how good this intelligence was. Intelligence is more art rather than science, and there are degrees of confidence that people have. In this case, the intelligence had been shared with a number of agencies. Only one agency felt confident about what they had observed, and many other agencies hadn't. That battle between those agencies spilled out to the New York Times, which completely accepted it credulously and ran with it. It was not true that Donald Trump had been briefed on it, and while plans had been drawn up in the case that it were true, it had never reached the level of certainty required for a full-throated response. It was part of a pattern of the media being willing to run any story using anonymous sources, of course, if they thought it would hurt Donald Trump. Didn't even really make sense in that the Trump administration, of course, had killed the Iranian who was responsible for paying bounties to kill American soldiers, also in Afghanistan, Qasem Soleimani. So the idea that the Trump administration would be soft on this didn't really stand to reason, and yet it fit the blueprint of any negative story based on anonymous sources being okay to run with. It was particularly frustrating given the context that just a couple decades prior, the war in Iraq had in part been had come to fruition because of supposedly airtight intelligence that Iraq was developing weapons of mass destruction. The media ran credulously with these reports of how there were these mobile weapons laboratories. That was based on intelligence that Germany had obtained from what turned out to be a fabulist who had like a personal vendetta in Iraq, codenamed Curveball. The U.S. had never even spoken to him. It turned out the information was false. And the media said that when it came to really important matters of international conflict, that they would be so much more careful in the future. That wasn't true, as evidenced by this Russian bounty story. One of the big players in that story was Adam Schiff, who was really trying to gin up anger at President Trump for not doing anything. We were able to report that, in fact, it was Adam Schiff's own staff who had been briefed on this Russian bounty intelligence months prior, and he had not felt it serious enough to respond to or brief the whole, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence himself. It's also reminiscent of another story that came a couple months later when The Atlantic, I think it was Jeffrey Goldberg, reported based on 4 anonymous sources that when Donald Trump had not visited Ain Marne Cemetery in France a couple years prior, it had been not, as reported, because rain had caused the cancellation, but because he didn't want to get it was rain, according to Jeffrey Goldberg's anonymous sources, but because Donald Trump didn't want to get his hair wet, and that he secretly loathed American soldiers or military cemeteries. That one also did not stand to reason that the president, who loves pomp and circumstance and military rituals, would not want that, or that the very next day he'd attended a different event at a cemetery where it had been raining. But more than that, you had numerous people on the record disputing this story, more than a dozen, I think, who had been in the meetings where the decision was made to cancel the event. They all said that wasn't true. There was contemporaneous evidence in the form of government documents about the decision to cancel that trip to Ain Marne. There were weather reports from that day. There was contemporaneous evidence in the form of government documents about the decision to cancel that trip to Ain Marne. There were weather reports from that day. None of the anonymous sources who made these claims, if they made these claims, ever came forward or explained how so many other people who were willing to go on the record would be wrong and they were right. The media were willing to use anonymous sources no matter how ridiculous those sources were, or no matter how much the facts on the ground didn't back up those anonymous sources, and they did that throughout the entire Trump presidency, and the year 2020 was no exception.
Hey gang, Dave Marcus, New York correspondent for The Federalist here. And my nominee for Worst Media Moment of 2020 comes courtesy of CNN's media critic Brian Stelter. In a truly remarkable question he asked a guest of his back in August, he said that there exists on the right media outlets that exist only to tear down Joe Biden. And then he asked his guest if there's any equivalent on the left of media outlets that exist only to tear down Donald Trump. This is nuclear level projection, because anybody who's turned CNN on for more than 3 minutes over the past 4.5 years knows that this is all that CNN does. In fact, it's all they talk about. The guest remarkably answered no, so I guess she's in the same boat. But she's not a media critic. You really have to ask yourself how this happens, especially given the fact that CNN has been absolutely clear, along with several other corporate media outlets, that they did not, because they said they could not, cover Trump the way they would cover any other president. So they had to focus on all of his alleged lying, on balancing what they saw as the negative aspects of his presidency. They were very clear about this. They've been very clear that they're not going to treat Joe Biden the same way. So, I mean, if that's not a media outlet existing solely, really, for the purpose of tearing down President Trump, I really don't know what is. Anyway, Happy New Year.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm here to tell you about one of the biggest media outrages of 2020. This one's a little bit inside baseball, but it's really important, and you can tell it's important because of all the consequences that happened because of it. Back in June, Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican from Arkansas, published an op-ed at the New York Times. It was called Send in the Troops, and it made the argument that if local law enforcement couldn't tamp down on the violence that we saw at the moment within inner cities across America, that the National Guard should be prepared to be brought up under the Insurrection Act to put down any kind of violence and to restore order to the streets. At the time, the opinion was held by, according to a number of polls, the majority of Americans. In other words, it was well within the mainstream to argue for such a thing in the pages of any newspaper, except at the New York Times, where it became a point of contention among all of their younger, more woke hires who came to social media getting around the Times policy for criticizing their colleagues by saying that the op-ed made them feel unsafe, making it an HR issue as opposed to a matter of opinion. This is something that they use to promote the idea that this was an out-of-line op-ed, something that never should have been published, both on Twitter and Slack channels and all the other various platforms. Within a few days, you saw the ramifications of this. The head of the New York Times editorial page, James Bennett, previously the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic for many years, was forced out. Who had the movement within the building of Jim Dow, the editor who had approved the op-ed in the first place. And it eventually led to the exit of Barry Weiss, the person who, despite being a social liberal and holding a bunch of views in common with her Times colleagues, has been deemed too conservative and too controversial because she does something as controversial as listen to Joe Rogan and pay attention to people who disagree with her. This is the sort of thing that has led us to a point where the Times, an op-ed page that had often been referred to within conservative circles as the only place you can only end up if you're criticizing conservatives or Republicans from the right of center, made that essentially mandatory. This is now a situation where the Times is not interested in voicing the opinions of anything that would offend any of its younger woke staffers who now effectively run the building. This may not seem like a big deal if you're not a subscriber to the New York Times, but it is a statement about the most popular newspaper in America and what it really thinks is acceptable in terms of opinion. Essentially, if you have anything that doesn't fall within the gap between Ezra Klein, their newest edition, and Charles Blow, then they're not interested in featuring it. That's a statement about the way that the Times readership and the people within the Times building who now matter view the world and the silo within which they wish to live. I'm Ben Domenech, and that's my media outrage for 2020.
I'm Joy Pullman, the executive editor at The Federalist, and I'm here with my reward, or ignominious reward, for worst media performance of 2020. So in my opinion, that goes to the New York Times' conspiracy theory from Peter Baker and Maggie Haberman that a video from President Trump was conducted in front of a green screen instead of outside on the White House lawn where it appeared. As I wrote for The Federalist in October, the New York Times published, then quietly deleted, a baseless conspiracy theory that a video of President Trump after a hospital stay for coronavirus was recorded not on the White House lawn, but in front of a digital backdrop. Before the article, this part of the article was deleted with no correction notice or explanation for what had happened here, The New York Times' article baselessly claimed Mr. Trump was shown on the south lawn of the White House, hundreds of feet away from the mansion. But it appeared to be a digital backdrop, as leaves blowing in the wind behind him could be seen repeating on loop. Judd Deere, a White House spokesman, insisted that he was definitely outside. Mr. Trump has not appeared before news cameras since his return from Walter Reed on Monday evening. This conspiracy theory was peddled not by QAnon, 8chan, Reddit, or one other of the dark media internet holes that those on the leftist media just love to hold up as proof that everybody in the world is crazy except for them. But it was published in the New York Times, that is revered upon among the left as the paper of record. That's my worst silly media performance for the year, but I actually think that the worst media performance of the year in terms of substance was the big tech and big media collusion to suppress the Hunter Biden and Joe Biden scandal until after the election. So that will be the scandal that alleges and has some decent evidence as well as federal investigations behind it, that Mr. Hunter Biden was possibly with the knowledge of his father using his family name to gain millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars for the family in foreign nations, including Russia and China. So according to the polls after the election, knowing about this story would have tipped the election decisively to President Trump if more voters had known about it. Unelected censors having the power to decide the leader of the free world is a terrifying reality. It's a lot easier to laugh about Maggie Haberman and James Baker's paranoia about Trump's videos and possible green screens that there's no evidence for. But that paranoia is a lot bigger than just hallucinating green screens instead of the White House lawn. It extends to coverage that is beyond bias and now really has gone into the territory of propaganda. So with that cheery thought, I do want to return to the thing that we have, that we can hope more in, besides, I just recalls to mind one of the hymns that's part of my religious tradition, that talks about trust not in princes, they are but mortals, earthborn they are and will decay. And we see that repeated constantly among our feckless, the elites and the people who control our country, which really are the media. So the only way of comfort that I find is luckily something that's called to remind at this time of year. I just pulled down a chrisman that is one of the things that reminds us of it. That's in the true light of the world, who is the source of all truth, who is the truth incarnate. And he's the one that we can trust in, because we sure as heck can't trust the media to tell us the truth or to run our country. So with that, from all of us at The Federalist, I'm Joy Pullman, the executive editor of The Federalist, wishing you a very Merry Christmas and a very happy 2021.
I'm Joshua Lawson, managing editor at The Federalist, and my selection for the worst media performance of the year goes to the Pulitzer Prize Committee for giving out their Pulitzer Prize in commentary to Nicole Hannah-Jones for her lead essay in the 1619 Project. This is bad on so many levels. On the most obvious level is the fact that the 1619 Project, and especially Nicole Hannah-Jones's premier flagship essay, is just wrong. It tries to center the entire story of America around slavery, when really that's just not the case. The American story is about the country trying to live up to the fundamental precepts outlined in the Declaration. The goal to preserve and defend and realize our natural rights given to us by God, by our Creator, not by government, those rights being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we've not always measured up to that promise of the Declaration. We've often fallen short, but the American story is about trying to get there. And so 1619 gets that just fundamentally wrong. The other problem is that a few weeks after winning the award, Nicole Hannah-Jones came out and publicly admitted that the piece was not intended to be taken as history, but it was about memory and about trying to control the narrative, when that's actually kind of in a bit of honesty that we should almost appreciate in a weird way, that she admitted to flooding the public schools with more culturally Marxist propaganda, which is the last thing they need. Her admitting that it is not history at all, but just about controlling the narrative is quite something. And of course, they did not rescind the award. She's still got it sitting on a shelf somewhere, and that's not good. Which brings me to the other problem that I have with this, which is that the Pulitzer Prize used to mean something, right? This is a prestigious award. It's gone to some very talented journalists and writers across various mediums. And in the commentary section of the Pulitzer Prize, we've had winners like George Will and Charles Krauthammer and Peggy Noonan. So now to have a piece of ahistorical fiction among those winners dilutes that legacy. It dilutes the name that award used to carry with it. And it's just sad to see. So that's my pick for the worst media performance of the year, the Pulitzer Prize Committee giving their commentary award to the 1619 Project's lead essay by Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Hey everyone, John Davidson here, political editor at the Federalist. One of the biggest media fails of 2020 was the Joe Biden AR-14 incident. This was when Joe Biden, during the Democratic primary, went to a auto plant in Detroit and got into an argument, a heated argument with a union auto plant worker about the Second Amendment and gun control, in which Joe Biden told the guy he's full of shit and that they should take this outside. He threatened to slap the guy in the face. He told him he was a horse's ass. And on top of that, he got all his facts about guns wrong, including the existence of something called an AR-14. Biden obviously was talking about an AR-15, but he said AR-14. He said that AR-15s are machine guns, which they're not, and that AR-15s are illegal, which they're not. And the bizarre exchange ended with Biden saying, "Do you need 100 rounds? Do you need 100 rounds?" The whole thing was captured on video and posted to Twitter, where the blue check media somehow concluded that Biden did awesome. And it was really great to see him standing up to this random auto worker and threatening him and having this really tense and angry exchange. Bloomberg reporter Jennifer Epstein spun the exchange as Biden pushing back and speculated that Biden supporters were into it. Jonathan Martin of the New York Times euphemized the exchange as an earthy Biden encounter that probably wouldn't hurt him with voters, at least not with Democratic primary voters, which I guess it didn't. Still, it's a bizarre thing to conclude if you're a reporter and you look at this exchange. But the worst exchange, no surprise, or the worst take on this exchange came from The Atlantic's David Frum, who thought it was, quote, amazing that anybody thinks this video makes Biden look anything other than terrific. He shushes an aide who wants to lead him away and then engages a hostile critic face to face, fact to fact. Impressive. It is impressive in a way that Joe Biden could be so wrong about every aspect of guns and gun control. But it's also impressive that someone like David Frum and the New York Times, Jonathan Martin, would just fall all over themselves in praise for Biden for this exchange. It's strange, but I guess it's to be expected. Listen for yourself.
These union workers that have been working countless hours under the Trump administration, I'd like you to explain how you plan to not only keep us working, but how you intend on getting the union vote when there is a large portion of the union workers that are gun enthusiasts, and you are actively trying to diminish your Second Amendment right and take away our gun.
You're full of shit.
All right, thank you.
No, shush. Shush. I support the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, just like right now, if you yell fire, that's not free speech. From the very beginning, I have a shotgun, I have a 20 gauge, a 12 gauge, my son's hunt. Guess what? You're not allowed to own any weapon. I'm not taking their gun away at all. You need 100 rounds.
When you were in Beto, when you said you're going to take our guns,
I did not say that. That's not true. I did not say that.
Video.
It's a viral video like the other ones they're putting out there that said they lie.
Your voice, you You said that you're taking the guns.
Well, he just clarified it. Wait. Take your AR-14s.
Okay, this is not okay.
Hold on.
All right.
Hey, let's
You
be
want to
real.
tell me
There's a lot of guys. Want to.
I'm not worried.
Hold on. Don't be such a worried guy. Hey. Look, here's the deal. Are you able to machine gun? I said, are you able to open?
Machine guns are illegal.
That's right. So AR-15's illegal.
How is that a machine gun?
No, it's not.
Semi-automatic.
Yeah, you need 100 rounds. You need 100 rounds.
In America, with handguns there are what you call assault rifles. Why are you advocating for assault rifles when people are dying by handguns?
My award for the worst media performance of the year goes to CBS's Leslie Stahl, who spent 40 minutes in a sparring match with President Donald Trump on the flagship program 60 Minutes. During the interview, Stahl seriously claimed, with an aura of self-righteous indignation, that there was not only no evidence to support the idea that Joe Biden spied on President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, but that Joe Biden was under no sort of scandal. In late October, we now know, however, that Stahl was just repeating Democratic talking points to the almost 17 million people watching the program. Now, Stahl embarrassed herself to those who know the facts, which include many of her colleagues, by the way, who really ought to know better. But sadly for the millions of viewers who might not, Stahl did them a real disservice by failing in her role as a true journalist. Stahl effectively whitewashed the entire Crossfire Hurricane investigation put into operation under President Obama, an administration that Joe Biden played no small part in. Yet at the same time that Stahl was dismissing the blockbuster reporting implicating Joe Biden and his son's business scandals, new evidence was coming forward almost daily in October to corroborate the New York Post reporting. Contents from the Delaware laptop published by the New York Post had also been obtained by federal authorities. And the idea that it stemmed from a plot of Russian disinformation had been debunked by the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, and the Director of National Intelligence. The incriminating contents had shown Joe Biden lying throughout the entire presidential campaign when he claimed repeatedly that he never spoke business with his son. The incriminating emails also showed Joe Biden poised to rake in millions from Chinese communist leaders. And these emails have been further authenticated by the FBI. Stahl, however, to 17 million people watching, refused to even entertain the idea that Joe Biden, her preferred presidential candidate, was under any sort of scandal. Of course, new reporting out this month featuring Hunter Biden himself acknowledging the existence of an FBI probe examining his finances have only further embarrassed Stahl and every other self-proclaiming journalist who dismissed the story altogether.
My award for the worst media performance of 2020 is proudly given to Don Lemon, Rick Wilson, and Wajahat Ali, who on a CNN segment in January of last year unintentionally created just the perfect Trump campaign ad. Now, this was during a Saturday segment of the show. You had Rick Wilson, who is a Lincoln Project type guy. You probably have never heard of him unless you read articles about his performances on CNN, like this one, where he was mocking the president's, quote, credulous boomer rube demo, where he kind of broke into a Southern accent, a bad Southern accent, and wheezed, Donald Trump's the smart one, and y'all elitists are dumb, in imitation of a Trump voter, apparently. Wajahat Ali, he clearly just wanted to be part of the joke. He was the other panelist in this Don Lemon segment, and he was going on to imitate a Trump voter like Wilson and said, you elitists with your geography and your maps and your spelling. And then Wilson goes, your math and your reading. Then Ali goes, only them elitists know where Ukraine is. And Don Lemon, who is an anchor at CNN, literally his title is anchor, was giggling like, well, you could say like a rube throughout the course of the segment, because he thought this like Laffy Taffy level mockery of Trump voters was just so funny that the anchor, Mr. Apple versus Banana, could not maintain a straight face while this like really, really basement level comedy act was occurring on his segment. Now, this was perfectly juxtaposed with a meme that Donald Trump had tweeted back in December of 2019. It's a picture of himself pointing, and it says, in reality, they're not after me, they're after you. Now, that was kind of mocked back in that December by the media, and they didn't understand it. But then just a month later, you have Wilson and CNN anchor Don Lemon laughing over this act that clearly shows contempt, and it shows what their opinion of a Trump voter is. A Trump voter is stupid and contemptuous of knowledge and facts according to their impressions. And again, this is the perfect example of not only is this what they think about Trump voters, this is what they say about Trump voters. And they're doing it on a platform that they complain Trump voters don't trust. They complain that Trump voters don't pay attention to outlets like CNN, and that Trump voters have distrust and in some cases contempt for outlets like CNN. But they've given them such good reason to not trust CNN. And the segment is a great example of that, because not only is the supposedly objective anchor, Don Lemon, clearly we see a case of misbranding in Don Lemon. We see a case of clearly someone lying about their intentions as a journalist, and it's just wildly misleading for somebody like Don Lemon to refer to himself as an anchor. So not only do we see that, we see clear bias, we see a mislabeled journalist in this case, but we also see what these folks think of Trump voters, and we see their willingness to say that in a space that they also complain is not trusted by Trump voters. So it's just this perfect combination of trends that explain why the populist moment continues to rage on and why so many people in this country don't trust the media. Now, they sort of took a victory lap and said they triggered snowflakes and there was fake outrage from hustlers on the internet. But no, actually, this is what really dooms them, because it's that they don't understand. Trump supporters don't need conservative media to tell them that they should distrust CNN, because the people on CNN show them exactly why they should distrust CNN. This is a glossy corporate media outlet allowing this grossly classist impression, and then letting those panelists defend it and letting their own anchor giggle away. This isn't just about Trump voters. This is about the corporate media's classism. This is about the corporate media's contempt, because there were a lot of Democrats that famously voted for Donald Trump. They voted for President Obama and for Donald Trump. That was a key demographic in his 2016 win and in the movement that he has built that will survive and outlast his presidency. So for this classist impression to grace CNN's airwaves, and then for the network really to allow them to take a victory lap rather than showing any sort of introspection, it's perfect. It shows what the elites in the Sella corridor think of people who voted for Donald Trump, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. They just think they're dumb. They just think they're dumb. And it's for that reason that I am proud to award the trio of Rick Wilson, Don Lemon, and Wajahat Ali. Really, this is an award that CNN won as a team. This was a team effort, and so I want to applaud their collaboration. I want to applaud the network's unity in their contempt for Trump voters. I think it's a real honor for them to be so distinguished in their unintentional, for their lack of self-awareness when it comes to their coverage of not just the president, but also of his voters. So well done, CNN, for being the most glistening example of what media elitism looks like and why it's so dangerous. Thanks so much for your service, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in to watch the Federalist's official ceremony honoring the worst media performances of 2020. It's been an incredible honor for all of us to bring and distribute these awards. It really was stiff competition, but we feel the winners do truly represent the worst of the corporate media. So on that note, we'd like to wish everyone a happy new year. We're optimistic that in the new year, there will be more and more new voices highlighting, calling out, and correcting the corruption within the corporate news media. We hope you'll join us as we cover the media's failure to cover the goings-on of the day. We know that over the course of the Biden administration, people in the press have already said they're going to take their feet off the gas a little bit. So we look forward, of course, to highlighting any such efforts to go easier on Joe Biden than on Donald Trump. And thank you so much for your time today. And always, we're so grateful to all of our loyal readers and listeners. So we'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.